My name is Earl Jesse. At the moment, I'm academically trained as an artist, and I run my own sort of workshops and things, various things. But I teach in self-defense and martial arts as well, and do personal training. But I suppose the beginning of my story...
Well, you're based in Hungerford?
Yes, the Hungerford, West Berkshire area. So
yeah, that's a distance, isn't it? It's sort of halfway between here and London almost.
Yes, almost exactly, yeah.
So tell us a bit about your experiences in your childhood and how it's reflected itself now in your world.
Yeah, okay. So when I was very young, my mother, I was told, once again, this is the information that I'm sharing now is only new to me for a couple of years, actually. I was fed a different story as a child. I was told that my mum ran away when I was about 18 months old. As it turns out, my father actually threw my mum out. She was born, and what I can only understand is she was postnatally depressed. So she was literally vacant the whole time as a child. So she would often leave me in the cot on the pram with my own nappy and my own mess, and leave the house while my dad was at work. So I'd be left for hours, sometimes half a day, if not more. So the very beginning of my life was quite interesting, if that makes sense.
I mean, is there anything that you found out more recently about why your mum was like that?
Yeah, when she gave birth to me, when the postnatal depression is usually the minerals, vitamins, all the great nutrients that the baby needs go to the baby, and the mother's left with nothing. It almost basically, in essence.
Well, how come that affects some women and not others? I mean, there must be a psychological aspect to it as well. It's not just about vitamins, surely.
No, well, I think it's a whole holistic thing. There's obviously the baby is the new life, so everything goes to the baby. Everything that's needed to the child goes to the child. Whatever's left over goes to the mother. I mean, you can see this sometimes physically with some ladies have a lot of children lose their teeth, and they get calcium deficiency, or they get brittle bones.
But how was the relationship otherwise between your parents?
Oh, when I was younger, it sounds quite volatile, to be fair. My father has a brilliant recollection of the very short relationship they had. My mum has no recollection up until about the age I was 5. So that kind of adds to the sort of understanding that she wasn't really there, if you get what I mean, mentally.
Yeah, so you were brought up mainly, just by your father. This isn't normal, is it, really? For most kids, they kind of need a mum. No, well, they need both, really, don't they?
I think it obviously beneficially both. Any mammal probably needs both parents, but humans especially. So I was brought up from about 18 months old by my father, who was the main, I suppose, breadwinner. So he wasn't there, so I used to be passed around from pillar to post to neighbours to, as I found out, an auntie looked after me for about 6 months. So very detached, and probably not a lot of physical touch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, okay, so this often can manifest itself in something called attachment deficit, where, your relationships with other people around you are kind of tainted by the fact that the affection that you should have had as a very small child wasn't there. So, this can really actually make people quite unstable sometimes. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't want to, get too personal with you.
No.
But I mean, that I think people don't necessarily understand these psychological terms. Attachment deficit is quite an important thing that can happen particularly to children, but it can carry right on into adulthood.
Yes, I've gone into this research actually myself because, my relationships have always they've always ended. So long-term relationships have always been quite difficult.
That must be a bit awkward, trying to going in through psychology books and saying, "Hang on, I can see me in there."
Oh yeah, you sort of look and it's like looking in a mirror and you're going, "That's me. Yeah, that's me. That's me. That's me. And then that's me."
Has that helped doing that, or it's a bit navel gazing? But it might be it's necessary.
It's helped a lot. It's allowed me to come full circle back to myself and understand that, hey, these are actually parts of the process of what you've gone through. This is almost like kind of predictable psychology, psychosis. Yeah. There's the sort of physiology that changes and the way you interact, the way you perceive things. It's helped me, I suppose, get an understanding, which has helped me move forward in some way and be more relaxed and more comfortable with myself.
Great. It's actually understanding why you are like you are or who you are. It's definitely going to help. Yeah. The other thing it must be worth mentioning at this point is what happens quite often to children when they're taken away from their parents, and this is happening increasingly these days. Even parents who simply don't have much of an income and have had their benefits cut off, they can now be threatened by social services, and quite often kids taken away from their parents because they've been kicked off benefits. This sort of thing, actually, at that time of life, it is really, I think it should be a criminal offence to take kids away from their parents unless you can really prove that those parents are deliberately abusing children. But anyway, how did that, in your early life, how did your experience as a really young child manifest itself?
As an early child. So I suppose growing up, it was very obvious that I didn't have a mum. But I suppose to me, mum was just a word rather than a person. I remember being at primary school, and I went to a very small little primary school in Great Shefford, and the mums used to turn up and pick up their kids. And I remember I was waiting for the bus, and I used to think, what is a mum? So I remember the mums used to bring presents and sweets to the kids, and I thought, I wouldn't mind one of these mums. It sounds like a good thing. But obviously, I'm not looking at a physical. I didn't understand what a mum was. So I went home and I asked my dad when he came home from work. And I said, Dad, what's a mum? And he said, a mum? I said, have I got a mum? And he said, your mum's either dead or she's married a black man and she's in America. And I was like, okay, so cool. And that was it. That was their only conversation about it.
Did you find that your father was able to almost be a surrogate mum, be the sort of cuddly, no?
He's never hugged me. I hugged him, how many years ago now? Probably about 5 or 6 years ago was the first time that I hugged him. Wow. And I tell you, my ex-partner was with me at the time, and she witnessed the whole event, and she was in absolute shock. The way it was almost like someone had put a gun to his head and threatened him. He froze and went all rigid. And I suppose some people just aren't like that, but we do need that physical contact, as youngsters. And of course, it's all about trust and, how you trust some people and don't trust other people, and it's about the comfort zone, the personal comfort zone. Yes, yeah. I mean, every time I go to see him now, I always say, I love you, Dad, thank you, and give him a cuddle. And he just sits there. He's sort of sat in his
rigid.
Yeah. He never returns the cuddle. I think maybe once. he's moved his arms. But
who knows? Maybe you're teaching him something.
Yes, I think personally, if I'm to observe it from a sort of third person perspective, I believe his father was very much like he is, and I think he hasn't moved out of that zone. He's just copying what he was taught or what he saw. So he's never really evolved, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So anyway, that has not been passed down to you. So anyway, what about your teenage years?
We rewind a little bit. So I go back into so when I was about I think 5 or 6. When I was about 6, my dad remarried. So he married a lady from a larger family, and it all seemed nice and sort of fun because it was when I grew up, it was my father, my disabled uncle who was born physically disabled, and myself. That's pretty much all the family I knew. So it's a very, very small environment. It's a very small family, and we kept ourselves to ourselves. I mean, we lived in one of the very small council houses in the village I lived in East Garston. There were only 3 council houses. So everything else is very affluent, single houses, thatched cottages, farms, houses with swimming pools. So very, very aware of that I didn't have what other people had as well. So there's lots of things.
But hang on, because that's actually quite a privilege, really, isn't it? To live in a little beautiful little village. This is one of the things they did after the Second World War. Is they actually got straight onto building council houses out in places which were traditionally, villages for wealthy people. Although actually quite a lot of village dwellers were farm workers and not very well off. And certainly nowadays, the council house in a village is quite a sought after thing. So whereabouts were you? Where is this village?
East Garston. It's West Berkshire, so it's in between. I suppose there's a village called Lambourn, which is well known for the racehorses, the Valley of the Racehorses. Yeah. It's a lot of Arabs and.
And was it a bit like cabin fever? You're out in the middle of nowhere. This is not ideal for most teenagers, is it?
Oh, when you're young,
or even younger than that.
Yeah, I mean. When you're young, I think it's fantastic because you've got rivers, streams, trees to grow. You get on your bike, you can just cycle, you can run for miles. You live off the land. You go scrumping, you eat fruit from the trees, you go fishing. I mean, it's endless amounts of imagination to go through. I think in a town and a city, I think sometimes that confinement causes that sort of rebellion, that cabin fever. Whereas in the early years, for me as a child, absolutely loved it. I was so in touch with nature, and I crave that still now. So that's kind of come full circle for me. As I got older, there was more of a craving to be around people like my own age. because in a small village.
Well, you see, for a lot of teenagers, if they're not doing something in the evenings, they're not interacting with other kids their own age, they start crawling up the walls.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. I'll get to that. I'll get to things like petrol bombing and shooting police officers and stuff. We'll get to that later on. So he remarried. Which was a very welcomed sort of situation, because all of a sudden the family of people of 3 suddenly become people of like 20. So we had all these new people, new faces, different age groups. There was all these new traditions coming in. My dad had one set tradition. Sunday was Sunday roast. That was the only traditional food, and Christmas and things. Birthdays were nothing. It was just literally those 2 things. You have Christmas and you have Sunday roast every Sunday. So this family moved into a rather large set family, I would rather say. And I think there were 6 siblings. Two of the siblings were twins, a boy and a girl. So I was sort of every Saturday we would go over there, and they'd go out and do things. And on Sunday they would always have like a Sunday roast. In the evening they would always have cakes and trifles and things. So all this abundance of food was amazing.
So did you fit in? Did you still feel like you were a bit of an outsider?
I was like an outsider. I was the youngest, not obviously, but I was the youngest person within that group as well. My uncle Arthur was disabled, so he was just sort of put in a chair and fed and stuff, and he didn't mind that. So anyway, this all seemed to be going quite well. And then I suppose the first elements when my dad got married, his new wife, I suppose what you would call my stepmother, there was some psychological games going on. So one of the ones that I remember was you had the kitchen cupboards. So you had the ones down the bottom with the kitchen sides, and then you had a cupboard up on the wall. And the cupboard up on the wall was quite clearly stated to me that was the family's cupboard. And I wasn't part of that family. And I was like, well, what family is this? And she announced she was pregnant and she had another baby coming on the way. So that was going to be hers, her child, and my dad's. So that was a cupboard. That was always full of treats. That was full of all snacks, things you could easily eat for the daytime. You don't have to prepare anything. You just take it out, put it onto bread and butter or whatever But the bottom cupboard was all like flour and bags of rice and stuff you had to cook. I was like 6 years old. So there was never any food in the house apart from those things. So my Uncle Arthur, who was disabled, and I were part of the other family. And she quite clearly stated that. I don't think my dad actually even knows today that was going on. This was kind of her sort of interaction with the two types of the family. So that continued for many years. There's a psychological, I would say, systematic starving. She used to purposely buy food, and food that I would never eat. I've never liked fish. I've never liked any type of fish. It always makes me gag. It literally makes me want to vomit, just the smell of it. So she'd purposely buy fish paste. She'd purposely buy fish and put it on the tables and stuff, knowing that I would never eat it. So I'd just sit there looking at it. And I was razor thin as a child anyway, so it wasn't like I needed to be eating less food. So these were kind of one of the sort of mind games and stuff. And she would say stuff to me like, "Oh, if you don't do this, you're going to go and live with your mum or your foster care. We're going to put you into adoption." So these were sneaky things she would say behind my father's back. So these were the sort of beginning of the sort of, I would say, emotional abuse.
You're saying something here about human nature, aren't we? That actually people have to work at being good. They have to work at being nice. Maybe people aren't naturally wonderful. Anyway, so you found something like that out from your stepmum.
Yes, very young age. And while this was happening, because this went on for many years, while this was happening, her younger brother, who was one of the twins, kind of took me under his wing and sort of befriended me, which was quite nice. I had like an older uncle. It was like pretty cool. It was almost like a friend, like an older friend, many years older than me. Little did I know that what was actually happening is he was grooming me. And that was the beginning part. So obviously I can look back now and I can see the stages of the grooming.
So how old were you at that point?
About 6, 7. I've done the police interviews and things, and I've been interviewed by a friend. We've got the videos and stuff. The actual memory of exactly when things happened are quite blurry. I think primarily because of the trauma that happened. So
what did happen?
I was raped on multiple occasions. So I was raped by him. But yeah, he groomed me in a ways. I think the the first way was the observation of watching me watching porn. He would sneak videotapes into his bedroom upstairs.
So this is interesting. I mean, how did he actually do that? I think people need to know what are the initial warning signs that someone is starting to do this sort of thing?
I think for one of the, I mean, if you can take it apart in many different cofactors. One of the ones, I wasn't really watched. I wasn't looked after as a child. I was always left to my own devices, so I was never really sort of monitored in any way. Like, I was a young child, so there should have been sort of every so often, where's Earl? You know, what's he up to? But it wasn't. There was never any sort of thing like that sort of thing happening. So that's another thing, sort of detachment of I suppose, parental responsibility for me. Then obviously he would isolate me in certain ways. He said, do you want to go upstairs and watch a film? And I'd be like, oh yeah. So he'd put on like a cowboy and western or something, or whatever it was, or put the TV on. And then he'd put on a porn DVD, a VHS tape or a Betamax. And he'd obviously watch how I reacted. And obviously I'd watching a lot of confusion. I didn't really know what I was watching. But I was introduced to hardcore porn sex at a very young age. And he would show me magazines and stuff and watch. Now I know he was observing how I was interacting with it and how my body was reacting to it. So he was, in some way, I suppose, watching me get slowly turned on, or to find out how my brain was figuring out that's a girl, that's this is a breast, this is a vagina, etc. Okay,
so how did it get on to, and how long did that go on for?
This, I can't give you an exact date, how long it went on for. I remember the initial stages. I can remember there were certain points of watching videotapes and reading magazines and stuff. The initial point was he used to babysit for two girls opposite where his mum lived. So he would be over there, and I think he must have been in his teens, late mid-teens, and he would invite me to go over there. And they had Sky Satellite, which was quite new back then. So then, if you don't know if you ever watched Sky Satellite, it used to be like RTL channel and stuff. There used to be soft porn, which was like fake porn. So he used to watch that while the parents were out. So he would sit on the sofa, and one time, I remember the very first time, he confessed to me that he was gay, and I didn't really know what gay meant. I had an understanding that was...
Well, again, is it you're 6 at this point? Or how?
6, yeah, about 6, 7, yeah. So I remembered it was like two boys. People go, you're gay, because two boys would hold hands or something, and they would laugh at two boys. So I kind of knew it meant two males, two boys, or two men, but I didn't understand the interaction of what actually meant if to have intercourse. So anyway, he told me he was gay, and he explained what gay people do, and he asked me to take my trousers down, and he would show me what gay men do.
So how long did this go on for?
The abuse, I can't give you a time scale.
A year, a month?
Longer. It happened between the ages of 6 and the ages of 9, because I know it stopped. It stopped when I was 9. So
did you stop it, or how did it stop?
So the abuse itself, what was happening when he was babysitting, sometimes when I wasn't there, what he used to do is watch the softcore porn channel, and he would masturbate. And I think at a certain point he started ejaculating, he wouldn't catch it, so he'd wipe it on the back of the cushions. And then what the parents of the parents that were hiring to look after his children, they found they must have smelt something, or they must have went to wash the cushion covers and saw this, and they were like looking at it, obviously being very suspect about what it was.
Yeah, so basically someone discovered him.
Someone discovered he was using the back of the cushions to wipe his semen.
So what about your father? What was his role in all of this?
My dad worked in racing. Well, he used to work in racing. He's a very small gentleman.
Horse racing?
Yes, he was a jockey.
Yeah.
He was a jockey, but he broke his neck in 2 places. So unfortunately, he couldn't continue riding the horses, so he became a head travelling lad.
So did you talk to your father about any of this? Was it all completely secret?
It was kept secret, primarily. One, the guy that my abuser, the guy Johnny, he would threaten me, and he would say, if you tell anyone, this is, and he would make I suppose sort of things, make certain gestures about what he would do and who he would say, and he'd say I was lying and stuff like that, and it's very difficult to remember exactly what he used to say, but I used to remember I was quite scared. But so I just kept it myself. But I never had a...
So it was actually the people who were getting him to do the babysitting that discovered it. And what happened then?
So they obviously took the cushions to his mum, and said, look, we found this. The only person that comes to our house that's on a regular basis is your son. So they called this massive meeting. Now, my dad wasn't there. I believe he was away with the horses, because he used to travel to France and Europe taking these like racehorses abroad. So his wife was there, which was my stepmother, and they had this meeting, and she asked me in secret, what is it? And I said, well, it's semen. I said the word spunk, because that's what I knew it was. It was called spunk then, because semen and cum didn't exist back in those days. So I said, it's spunk and it's Johnny's. And she was like, right. So they asked me to leave the room. And then I'm guessing something happened. But after that very meeting, he stopped interfering with me. So
was there any hint of this being reported to the police at the time?
No, not at all. Not at all. I didn't say anything. It was kind of a weird relationship, because I believed he was my friend. I believed he was my good guardian. I believed he would protect me. And I was a very lonely child in that sense. I just spent a lot of time alone. So one of the things he would say was, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. Of course, being 6 or 7 years old, it doesn't sound like much, but when you're that age and you don't have a...
Especially since you've been isolated previously. Anyway, so that was cleared up at the time, but, I mean, how did it manifest itself later in your childhood and adolescence?
Well, during the period, my going up into sort of secondary school, there was a big change in my behaviour. Obviously, pubescent, coming into, the hormones and stuff change. I was always very, very gentle. I was hyperactive as a child, but very, very polite. I would never really do anything to anyone, never hurt anybody. Not that I, wasn't violent or aggressive or anything, but so I was bullied quite a lot as a child as well. So I'm guessing that's another trait as well. Childs that are very introvert, or children that are picked on, tend to have a certain energy or vibration frequency about them that kind of... It's like animals. They can sense when something's weak. They can sense when something's unprotected. So you're talking on different paradigms now. We're talking on different sort of dimensional frequencies and things. You're going into different things, but there's a sensory thing that people know. They can sort of like a mugger or a pickpocket. They would see someone's distracted, and they can hone in. They're looking for certain people, aren't they? There's a certain air about people, a certain aura about people. Anyway. I went to secondary school, and the first year I spent quite a lot of time being bullied. That went on for a while, and I could feel this thing building up inside of me, but I wasn't sure what it was. But there was a lot of suppression, there was a lot of aggression, there was a lot of anger, a lot of hatred, but it was just stuck in, and it was almost like sort of pushed down. And a breaking point was I befriended a local guy, a friend, who was a few years older than me, but he was an absolute psychopath. And this guy had been expelled from many schools. He'd smacked teachers round the head with chairs. He'd been taken to Besselsley over in Oxford, which is an attitude and behaviour school. So when he would come back, I befriended him, and he was an anti-bully. He was a bully himself, but he was a psychopath, and he was a big guy. For his age, he was huge. So his mum was an alcoholic, used to beat him with train tracks and stuff. So he come from a very aggressive, violent upbringing. So for him, dealing with fists and weapons were the first port of call for him. That was his way to deal with stuff. So he wasn't scared of anybody, whereas I was the opposite, and he sort of took me under his wing. There was an instant sort of bond there, nothing sexual or anything like that, like a proper brother, and he could see that I suppose in some way he could see there was things happening in my mind. I wanted to get it out, and he kind of pushed my buttons, and he kind of used to sort of bully me a little bit and sort of push me, and I'd fold and I'd cry, and he'd say, just get up, come on, stand up, and he'd sort of put me around and he'd sort of give me a sort of cuddle, and he was sort of bringing me on, and I can see he was almost teething out this kind of temperament. And then and one day at secondary school, I remember we were playing a game, and there's these big iron gates, and we're running around, and one of these guys closed the gate on me, and I banged into the gate, and I flipped, it just broke. And I just savagely attacked this guy in the playground. And everyone because no one's ever seen me do that before. They've never seen me lose my temper before. And it felt good. It felt really nice to be released. But I was out of control. It was almost like it happened, and I suddenly come back into myself, and everyone's just looking at me. And I'm just looking at my body.
So, I mean, it's almost like you've taken years and years of people doing things to you without being able to do anything, and then suddenly something has snapped.
Snapped, yeah. And I would say my friend Tony was at that time my friend Tony was the one that he must have either he observed it, subconsciously saw something. He was triggering stuff inside me, and it was kind of, I suppose, hormones, age, body was changing as well, mind was changing, and from that point on, things just started happening. I was a small person, thin, but my mind, my temperament was much bigger than me. So I was not bothered about picking up something and hitting someone around the head with it. It didn't bother me anymore. It was almost like, you got something to say to me? Okay, let's go. And then it would be straight into a fight. So I stopped backing down. If anything, I started going the other way, that's when the tide sort of turned.
Looking for a fight?
Well, I would put myself in situations, or I'd say stuff, or I would push the border.
Were you becoming a psychopath like your friend?
Yeah, I think definitely so. Sociopathic and sociopath. But I was already detached, remember. There was the makings for me to be that kind of person, but we're already there. The cofactors were already in place. So my friend and I, there was another guy called Tom who we used to hang around with, and we terrorised this little village. I mean, we used to rob stuff, break into places. One of our favourite hobbies, two favourite hobbies. One was to go into break in to get lawnmowers and steal the petrol into the glass milk bowls, nick T-shirts off the line and make petrol bombs. And then what we would do is go around. There was three roads into the village, and we'd go around and petrol bomb the roads so people couldn't get in. And we would just petrol bomb them. Then what we'd do is sit in the hedge with an air rifle and shoot the cars. This is like age 15 years old. What we didn't know was the police had been called. So we saw this diesel car thinking it was a taxi driving around the village, and we were shooting this diesel car. Turns out this diesel car comes into the estate, and it comes in and we're shooting it again. And I look like, Tony, it's got a light on top. It's like the old white Escorts with a little bobble, like the cherry light on top, the blue one. And he was well known. He was known by the police, and they already knew it was him. So they got out of the car. And this was back in the day when police officers would literally give you a clip round the ear. They'd give you a bit of a hiding. And they came into the house, just walked straight in, didn't even knock on the door. They knew it was us. And they found the gun. And they had a chat. And they took me into one room, took into a room, give us a little bit of a hiding. And I said, right, that'll be enough. And then walked out and left it. And that was it. We just sort of washed their hands with us. So that's how the police used to deal with people like us.
But you just carried on doing it or not?
We just got small guns, and we started sort of shooting houses and stuff rather than cars and people now. So, but yeah, we went on and did a rampage. But
so hang on, are you talking about air rifles?
Air rifles, yeah. But we had Buffalo Springs, like quite high powered. Anyway, so with my friend Tony, we started experimenting with cannabis and LSD. This is kind of, his friends were doing like amphetamine speed.
I mean, is it because how did you initially get hold of that sort of?
Well, he was. I said he was older than me, so he was already out working. So he would work on doing doing fencing and stuff in Britain, and labouring. I left school at 15 because I was one of the youngest in my year. So I was doing college, so I was around people taking drugs all the time. I drink, yes, definitely. I used to drink vodka, and so I collapsed. But so he was around people that were taking drugs, and I was around people taking drugs, and there was a curiosity growing, and we would talk about it. And they're idiots, those people take drugs, they're silly, just drink's the way forward. But drink would make us aggressive, and we'd go out and one of the local pubs.
I mean, at this point, surely you must have come to the attention of the police enough times to...
Oh, yeah. I've been arrested. I've been arrested at 15, 16, but under the age of 18. So the police would literally... one time they had a telephone book, and they give me a hiding for a telephone book so there's no bruises. So this is when I was a kid. I wasn't even 18 years old. But this is police back then, and they would just let you go.
So this is 1980s, yeah?
This is, the 80s, yeah. So...
but no, you didn't go to court?
No, crikey. I didn't go. I went to... even when I got done for shoplifting, they just slapped me on the wrist and said, just get out of here, you idiot.
Okay, so the drugs, what happened?
So the drugs were sort of... Things were sort of happening with the cannabis, smoking and stuff, and LSD sort of came into our scope, our radar. So we decided to experiment with stuff. We had no idea what we were doing. We were sort of asking people to sort of, what do we do, take this. And so we did the LSD for a while, opened our minds, made us a bit more peaceful, a bit more spiritual, I suppose. But we were always pushing each other. If one did 2, I had to do 3. If he did 3, I did 4. There was a constant competitiveness of us. If someone did that, if you pushed him, I got to push her. There's always this constant you know, and it's sort of rivalry, but like a brotherhood. And our other friend Tom, he sort of broke off from the gang. He was like, "This isn't. You guys are just pushing it too far. You're always taking it." And he could see where we were going, so he broke off, and so we stayed together.
I mean, was it easy to get hold of drugs in a little village?
Yeah. It's, I mean, just because you're in a village, it doesn't mean that you're not connected to towns and stuff. And there's always people that go to towns and buy bulk, and then they might not be drug dealers as such. They just buy a bulk for a little bit cheaper. They bring it back to their local little village, and they have a couple of people they sell it to, and they make a couple of pound on what they sell, and sometimes what they purchase, they actually buy it for free because the profit they make actually covers what they bought it for. So you could call that a warehouseman or a drug dealer, whatever you want to. But they would, you know, there was always ways and means. So they, we experimented with LSD and cannabis for a while, and then we used to, through the weekdays, we'd go to a local pub called the Queen's Arms just down the road. Very, very affluent pub. Lots of was
that in your village?
Yes, yeah, it was the only pub in the village. Anyway, there was a lot of trainers used to do, the jockeys and trainers used to go. So on Fridays and Saturdays, it was full of affluent people with a lot of money. So on the weekdays, we would go down there, use the pool table and stuff. And there was the landlord. There were 3 landlords that owned the pub. I'm not going to mention names because I'm guessing some people are around. But anyway, one of them used to chat to us, really nice guy. And we would go down there, have a couple of drinks and play pool and stuff. And anyway, I think it was one Thursday night, we'd had a couple of drinks. There was a group of about 8 guys in the pub. And they were kicking off in the pub and making a bit of a ruckus and causing a little bit of issue with customers, so customers were leaving. Anyway, they said something to us while we were leaving. And my friend Tony said, "That's all right, let's go." And walked outside. He said, "You got your knife on you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, let's go by the tree. And outside there's a huge, great oak tree. And we knew their cars were parked next to it, so we just sat by the tree and waited for them to come out. And when they came out, Tony walked up and he had a lump of wood with him, like a part of a tree branch, and walked up and said, "You got something to f***ing say to me?" And they go, "What? You got something to f***ing say?" And started smacking one guy around the head with a tree, with a branch. So I ran over with my knife, pulled my flick knife out and stuff. The guys were like, "Whoa," they're all running around the car park like rats running around. I said, "Come on then," trying to slice them up. And of course, these guys were literally like headless chickens running around trying to get into their cars. We were smacking them with the cars, kicking them and stuff. And the guy from the pub was watching all this, and he saw these 2 no more than late teenagers take on these 8 guys in a pub car park, and literally they ran off. "Oh, we're going to come back and get you" and stuff.
So were any of them seriously injured at that point then?
I don't know. Well, they couldn't have been that injured because they came back the next week. They came back the following Friday. So what had happened after that incident, we went back home. We just forgot about the weekend, did our usual sort of LSD stuff on the weekend and done our trips. And then on a Wednesday, exactly a week later, on the Thursday evening, this guy, the landlord, had knocked on my dad's door and knocked on my friend Tony's door. He'd left a message with my dad and said that we should come to the pub. And Tony had spoken to Tony's mum and said he should come to the pub. We've got a present for us. And I'm thinking, so we obviously got tooled up. We thought it's our local. We haven't been there for a week. So we took like a little iron bar with us, extra knives and stuff, and went into the pub expecting to get a kick in, you know, and expecting it to be, you know, a proper kick in. But we thought, pride, ego, this is our village, this is our pub, you know, mentally. Anyway, went in there and the guys sort of said, "Come in, guys, give us some free pints of Kronenberg and stuff." And I'm thinking, he's going to get us drunk and the guys are going to come in. It's like, you know, it's like the old gangster films, you know, it's like a soft touch. So we're about 3 pints in and Tony's going, "Don't drink anymore, don't drink anymore." He's probably spiked the beer, he's probably got vodka or something in it. He said, just don't drink anymore. And the guy, he said, "Have another pint and we'll go upstairs in my flat." And Tony's like, "This is it, they're going to take us upstairs, they're going to jump us from behind." Tony was super paranoid, that's what kept him alive, I think. Anyway, we ended up going upstairs in this guy's flat and he had these little white lines of powder up on the kitchen side. And by this time, I had no dinner at all. I hadn't eaten since like probably 9 o'clock in the morning, so I'm completely empty. 4 pints of Kronenberg in this skinny little belly of a body. And I'm swaying around in the bathroom thinking, am I going to be sick or do I need to toilet? And I'm sat with my hand on the ceiling trying to focus. Anyway, Tony thought it was speed. He thought it was amphetamine. Turns out this was proper grade A cocaine. And of course, when you've been drinking and you do cocaine, you sober up instantly. As seen in the film, the Denzel Washington film, where he's a pilot and alcoholic. And there's a part in the film where they invite the drug dealer in and he gets these 2 bags of coke.
Do you know what the film is?
There's one, It's about the airplane. He flips upside down, so people will know. So I was up in the flat, and I was in between the point of either going to be sick or go to toilet, and I could hear my friend Tony sniffing, going, taking these things, and he was like, oh, and I thought, oh, what's he doing? And as I walked out, I managed to not throw up, and he passed me this £50 note, and I thought, oh, big, £50 notes were massive back in the 80s, they were huge. And he passed me his note and said, he got some speed. And I was like, speed? I'm thinking speed. I thought, oh, okay. And I went over there and I just did these tiny little lines and sat there, and I sort of leant against the kitchen counter, and I was sort of like clearing my nose, thinking, and after a couple of minutes, all this, like, this drunkenness, this dizziness, the sort of your head spinning, just went. And the chest pumped up, my shoulders went back, and I just thought, whew. I thought, I'm here. I thought, well, hang on a minute. I thought, well, what's just happened? And it was like that, like I said, in the film Flight with Denzel Washington, there's a scene, because the pilot's an alcoholic, and he makes this manoeuvre where he turns the plane upside down, he has to go to court, etc. Anyway, they put him in a hotel room the night before the court case, forgetting that he's an alcoholic, and of course it's got a bar in the room.
Yeah, so a mini bar. Yeah,
mini bar. So he drinks all the alcohol. They go in the morning to pick him up, and he's splattered across the bed drunk, and they're like, right, what can we do? And someone says, get him some cocaine, and they go and get this dealer that comes in with these 2 massive bags of cocaine, going, this one's such and such, and this one's really good. They go, just give us the really good stuff. They get him to snort these couple of lines of coke, and Denzel Washington's up like, right, we're off to the courtroom. They get him in a suit, and he's walking fine, he's straying down the room. So it's just a snippet on what cocaine can do if someone's really drunk, and sort of.
And even if they are, or if they're not drunk, do you think sometimes politicians do that before they go into the House of Commons?
Oh, come on. I think thing like cocaine, certain people can take it with very little facial, very little effects that can be seen. Especially if you're taking small amounts as well, tiny small amounts. If you go back to films like Scarface and that, these guys were sniffing it all the time in the film. Obviously, these are films, but the representations of real life. And if you're taking tiny little dips of cocaine, it doesn't really affect you. You know, if you take like loads of it, you get itchy, you fidgety, your stuff, your eyes go massive and dilated. But if you're wearing
cocaine, yes. What about things like heroin, crack?
Oh, that comes later. That was we basically that was our introduction to cocaine, and also an introduction to an opportunity to be minders or bouncers for this pub. So we were paid not in cash, we were paid in alcohol and cocaine to look after the pub and to keep the idiots out, even though we were complete idiots ourselves in that sense. But this landlord was like, look, I've got idiots that come in my pub. I've got people that spend hundreds, if not nearly thousands of pounds a weekend in my pub on bottles of champagne, treating their girls, their ladies, their wives. I don't want idiots in here pushing these customers away. So he would literally have us in the pub doing stuff and things, and it kind of word spread. And the pub's a very interesting place because a guy that used to come and work there and rented a flat at the back, we got friendly with, and this guy used to sell pot. And it was a conversation in a pub over a game of pool. And, do you want some pot? Yeah, I got some back at the flat, and we got introduced to this guy. And this guy called Carl, he was like, oh yeah, come back, and we were sort of mingling with him, and he basically adopted me. He saw something in me. He couldn't control my friend Tony, but he thought he could probably control me. Once again, observation from the past, from myself looking at how things worked out. So he got me to start selling pot for him. It's cannabis, like solid. It was like what you call mirror press or soap bar. Soap bar is probably the easiest word. So people that know about 9 bars in cannabis, and you get soap bars, you cut into ounces, you have ounces, and you cut down into eighths. So this guy
hash, basically.
Cannabis, solid lump. So a 9 bar would be like a giant thick bar of chocolate, and it'd be like seal packed in like sellotape, or like seal packed in like some sort of like cellophane. And then what you would do, there's many ways to heat it up. You could microwave it, you could heat it on water and stuff, you'd wrap it up, stick it in the oven. But the way is then you cut it with a sharp knife into ounces, and then from the ounces you cut it down into small blocks of eighths, and you could heat it and then burn it into your Rizzler and have it and smoke spliffs. So this was my first introduction to kind of drug dealing, or to sort of being shaped to sort of sell for someone, to work for someone. And that was this is the sort of big opening now. So we were sampling drugs, taking drugs, drinking alcohol, partying, and we started meeting more and more people through me selling cannabis. And then I was selling acid, and I was selling bits of coke and stuff. And then before you know it, you've got a reputation for yourself. And you don't really know it, but people phone you up. People have phoned you up all for the week. They phone you every day of the week. You got any pot? You got any pot? Drive down in vans and taxis and stuff. And my dad's, you got a lot of friends. People knocking on my door every couple of 20 minutes, half an hour, especially on Friday nights and Thursday and Friday nights and Saturday nights. So I kind of sort of got into supplying, but from being supplied from this other guy, who, as I found out, was quite big time. He had big connections up north.
So what actual drugs were you dealing? Let's go through the whole list.
Well, anything from basically street drugs, so from LSD to microdots to cannabis to Mirapress, sometimes grass, amphetamine, speed, ecstasy, cocaine. One of the things I never sold when I was doing those things was heroin. I always refused to sell heroin. I always saw it as a dirty drug.
What about crack?
No, never sold crack or heroin at that time.
Ah, right.
Yeah. So what happened, we went through the party scene into amphetamines, into ecstasy, did the whole ecstasy loved up scene, everyone, the summer, the big summer of love, and that was happening every...
Some people have said that ecstasy is very different now to what it was originally.
Very different
Is
now.
that true?
Yes, yeah, very different now.
How different?
I think the chemicals they've been using now they're very different the way it affects people from what I can see and what I can tell from I've got
different in what way?
It doesn't seem to be doing the same sort of loved up sort of. I mean, I think the elements are there, but I think that the framework, the full framework. I mean, ecstasy back then was. It was powerful, it was strong, it went on for a long time. Now everything seems to be more diluted. Even the music's changed, the rhythm of the beats have changed in the music. So there's a constant evolution in these sort of things. And but back in the ecstasy scene, obviously the gangsters got involved, the football hooligans got involved, and it became more of a business.
Okay, so how did you come to graduate, if you can call it that, onto heroin and crack?
So, what used to happen? We would go off and we did these big parties. Like a Thursday night, we'd probably do drinking, a bit of coke, bit of speed, and then Friday and Saturday we're doing loads of ecstasy. It was just all about the ecstasy and partying up, having set up big speakers in forests up on the Ridgeway and stuff, and do free parties, going to raves, going to clubs in Oxford, in Chippenham, in Swindon, in Bristol, just going wherever there was London Club UK and stuff, getting really partied up, getting dressed up and doing the whole thing. By that time, I suppose I had got a reputation for myself.
How old were you at this point? Yeah?
Oh, I'm probably going to say about 19. It was a very quick, because I was about 15 when I started.
Were you still connected with the pub at this point? Or?
No, that had all sort of dwindled out now. I mean, I was still connected to the guy.
You had better things to do. Maybe.
Well, I was bigger fish to fry at that time. But I mean, that was the main element. But we were dealing in cars, we were dealing in goods, like things called snides, which is stolen clothing that was fakes and stuff, stolen clothing, stolen goods, stolen cars. There were all anything that sort of went in with that sort of ilk of people. You kind of started rubbing shoulders with people, and things would come in, things would influence, and someone say, look, you've got a couple of hundred, we can put this in, buy this deal, get a bulk, do that, sell it, make about £500 profit. So you're taking £700 out from a £200 investment. And back then it was like, that's easy. So you'd always be making profit from other things as well. Things wouldn't always work out, people would get busted or whatever, but there was a continual supply of money. Bearing in mind from the very off, from my start, I came from a poor family. There was no doubt I wasn't from anything else. We had literally nothing. My dad, I remember a big silver pot being on the stove over two of the big rings, the metal rings, and that would be filled up during the week with dumplings, with bits of meat that my dad being given that would be cooked, and that would just be soup and stodge for the week. So we lived out of literally like a big bowl, and that was pretty much. And then Sunday was the only time we actually had like a proper meal. So we'd have bowls of stew most of the time. Sometimes we'd have mashed potato and stuff with it. But we literally lived from hand to mouth.
But you're hitting the big time now.
Well, there was always a deficit, the recognition of not having anything. All of a sudden, I became self-employed. I became self-powered. I had the temperament. I had the sort of the nasty sort of attitude. I was detached. I was sociopathic. I was, in essence, psychopathic. I didn't care for myself. Therefore, I didn't care about anyone else. There was no feeling for anyone else. Everything was numb. Everything was detached.
Do you think this was connected with what happened to you as a child?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, being neglected or there's lack of nurturing from being a baby, then moving forward into the abuse, the sexual abuse. The template of my body is to be used and abused. That's the template I was given, and that's the template that I was living from now. My body was to be used and abused. by me. I was going to use and abuse my body. I was going to numb the pain. I was going to forget the memories. I didn't.
You
want
mean
to
like others had?
Of what, like
others had done to your body?
Well, like the abuser, the guy Johnny who would abuse me. So he'd raped my body. You know, he had done things to me, and other people had beaten me and abused me and bullied me. So there were other people doing. So there was everything from emotional turmoil and abuse, from lack of comfort and care and attention, to then physical abuse, being beaten, being bullied, being victimized, being isolated, and then obviously being sexually abused as well.
Anyway,
so,
let's get on to the crack, the heroin.
So we used to use what we found was when you come off all these like upper drugs, these high drugs, when you come back down, you go through the opposite end of what you're feeling. So you get schizzy, you get paranoid, you get itsy, you can't sleep, you get insomnia, so you start getting paranoid and stuff. So these are really uncomfortable times. But we all knew that would happen. So we used to drink sometimes. But when you drink, you can't really go out and drive anywhere. And when you drink, sometimes you get a little bit narky, you end up fighting with your friends and stuff. So heroin was introduced by a traveller guy, a New Age traveller over in a village called Lambourn, to a friend of a friend, and people were like chasing the dragon. And they were saying, when you come off the pills, just smoke a little bit of heroin, smoke a bit of the dragon. And like, really? And you get no paranoia, you get no fear. And not only that, you can walk around, you can talk. You got a bit of a voice, you sort of talk a little bit differently. Your eyes, your pupils go like pinholes. I mean, literally like heads of pins. Like cocaine and ecstasy and stuff, and that your eyes go massive like dinner plates. These ones go pinned. It's the complete opposite. So we found on the Sunday morning, we'd be all about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, all coming down, smoking pot, and we just get a bit of tinfoil out. We had no idea what we were doing. We'd like just make holes, like dents in tinfoil, pour it in there and just burn it and smoke it. But we found it worked. It started bringing us down, and the come downs were nice. They were, it was like being wrapped in cotton wool in a silk blanket. It was lovely, like that golden brown, texture like sun brings me. All that song's all about heroin. It's all about the soft, warm feeling of it. There's no paranoia, and you can walk around, you can drive around.
Surely, there's a come down after the heroin too.
That's a physics. Well, the thing with heroin is not really. You don't, not in the beginning stages, but there are physical hooks that start attaching, physical things that really start getting into you, but that takes time. But
what are they?
So we started using heroin as a come down tool only. We used to use alcohol, we used to exchange it for heroin, but then sometimes we couldn't get ecstasy and we couldn't get speed, couldn't get the stuff we wanted, so we could always get heroin though. So we would just do heroin for the weekend, for one weekend, and then bit through the week, and then you'd be smoking pot and you just have a couple of toots on the heroin, and you find out you're doing it pretty much every day. It's like you were smoking pot, now you're just chasing heroin. And before you know it, it's the only drug you're doing. And this is when I stopped selling everything, and I refused to sell anything else apart from pot and heroin. That's all I sold, because it was my main drug. So I didn't need to sell anything else. I didn't want to deal with all those bloody hippies, those LSD freaks, those party loved up huggy people. Sod off. I want to deal with heroin people that are going to come to me 10 times a day, and they're going to supply me with my habit.
And where were you getting it from?
Where it was coming from all over, from Wiltshire, from Bristol. Well, this is, as we spoke before. We went through the ranks. Up through sort of the guys over in Wiltshire. We're getting some stuff from Reading, but the quality in Oxford and Reading was okay. But we couldn't. Blackbird Leys was one of the places in Oxford where we used to sort of get stuff, but we found it difficult to push past a certain layer. There was a certain line. We wanted to buy bigger bulk, but people wouldn't trust us. So we found this guy in Bristol that we call it the front line, so that was a nickname. We go to Swindon, we get in a car, we'd meet a couple of people, and we'd drive up with our cash.
That was Grosvenor Road at the time.
Was it? Yeah, probably.
In St Paul's, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, we call it Frontline. The guy, I remember his name was Pete. That's it. I have no idea anything else about him. I just know the house was boarded up. It had iron bars on the outside and it had iron bars on the inside. And we used to think, it was to stop the police coming in. He said, no, that's to stop the addicts coming in. And by the front door, they'd have a big reel of dirty needles wrapped in sellotape. So if anyone come in, rather than have a gun or a knife, they just had dirty needles. And they'd stab you with these needles if you tried doing anything. So they was like lying around. So the guy and his wife, or guy and his girlfriend, who used to live in this house, they barely ever left the house. Only time they left the house is when you turned up with a big wad of cash, and they would get a driver, and you'd go with them, and you'd drive, and it'd be you with a wad of cash to Frontline. And they would always take a sawn-off shotgun or a handgun, And there was all these rules. You're like saying the driver, Pete, always takes the gear. He's the one that swallows it. So anything that happens, he swallows it. And that's the rule. The driver is the one that drives. If whatever he does, you just follow what he says. You follow what he says. You follow what he says to do, and you just sit in the back and don't open your windows when we're parked on front line. Never open your windows. You want a cigarette? Tough shit. So you have to sit in the car. If you open your window a little bit, a knife will come through. That's literally what someone will put a gun to the window, and it was like literally going there. It was like being in a film. You know, your heart beating in your throat. We'd be like smoking crack and stuff, and like because the crack sort of came in with the heroin because you spent so long being down, you'd do crack to sort of pick yourself back up. But crack's very short-lived. So before we left to go to front line, we used to smoke loads of crack just to try and get ourselves in the headspace because we were country bumpkins going into towns, and all of a sudden we were moving into city territory now. These guys grew up in a city. They lived in a city. They walked and talked that language. They knew what to look for. They could suss out who was what. We weren't. We were the oddbods, and we were trying to break through these sort of layers.
So how often were you in Bristol picking heroin
Every couple of weeks. The supply was we broke past the townships as such. We were buying more than the guys in the town, and we were supplying certain elements. And I mean, it was interesting. It was like watching the films, but it was living a film.
I mean, you're also in the guns as well now.
Yeah,
Did you need guns yourself, or did you feel like you did? I mean, remember you were throwing knives around previously.
So when I was younger, when I was much smaller. I remember being in Spain and I bought a butterfly knife. I didn't know why I wanted it. I just wanted a butterfly knife. Maybe in my head. And as I got to about 15, I just used to start carrying this knife with me. That was my weapon of choice. I didn't pick up weapons or tools or bottles or bricks and stuff like that. Knife was mine. I was small, I was skinny. But if I had a knife and you got close to me, I'm going to cut you. And that was my way. I wasn't a big guy. I didn't pack a punch back then. I didn't have that kind of technique, but I had a knife. So if you got close to me, you were going to get cut.
So are you in the world of guns now, or what?
My friend at the time, he was buying guns and stuff. We had a couple of people that were sort of, I suppose, wannabe gangsters, wannabe Gs, and they were like, oh yeah, I want a gun because it was just in case such and such. But because we were moving up, we realised that having a gun was probably beneficial for us, for other people to know we've got guns, just to know that just in case you do want to kick our door in, because one of the things that people don't talk about probably in sort of, I suppose, in day-to-day size, is as you're coming up through the ranks, you're unprotected. You're not, unless you're part of a family. You've
got to have a roof. I think the way they describe it, someone is your roof.
Yeah, you've got to be part of a family or
that
connected.
might be the police, and it might be the crime gangs,
or both. Yeah. But we didn't have
both.
that. Yeah, we didn't have either of that. We just had our reputations from where we lived, and he had more reputation than I, like I said. So guns were they were a smaller part. Like I think I mentioned, the primary thing was heroin. That was our primary goal. We wanted to get large amounts of heroin, cocaine as well, but that was secondary goal. That wasn't a big supplier, but people would buy that if they had it because it was expensive. It was more expensive than heroin. And the guns were literally the tertiary sort of part of it, but they were more for protection for ourselves, just in case, but also almost like a shield to say, look, we've got them and we will use them. Because we weren't in the right headspace. But that all exploded. My friend got arrested. Word got out that he had a gun. He actually threatened a guy with a gun. That's what it was. Some guy owed him money, about £45 or something ridiculous. So he put a gun to his head and threatened him. This guy went home and cried to his mum and dad. Mum and dad phoned the police. They did an investigation. Blah blah blah. Bang! He went in prison for 8 years. So the whole heroin scene collapsed. I moved away. I moved out of the area. I'd started dating a girl in a different town. And I sort of went on the ripples of the pond were sort of going out, and I was moving away. And then about 3 years later, I came back full circle. I came back to the little villages, the sort of Lambourn area, the East Garston area. And at that time, I suppose I'd matured. I was looking for a way out of heroin. One of the things I will say is I spent a year doing heroin intensively, and I tried to get off heroin. It took me 2 years. So these are the hooks that I'm talking about. Obviously, everyone's different. Some people can pick and choose. I suppose for me, I had psychological issues. I had a hole to fill, a hole in my soul. And because I was always trying to fill that hole, there was always something missing. So when I finally sort of tried to get off, I successfully got off heroin, I used alcohol and amphetamines. But I was injecting heroin at the time. I'd gone from smoking it into injecting it now. So I was injecting speed, amphetamines, and drinking lots of alcohol, so like bottles of whiskey, bottles of Jack Daniels and things. So my average week would have been a Thursday night, a half bottle of Jack Daniels. On a Friday night would have been a whole bottle of Jack Daniels, Saturday night, a whole bottle, and Sunday, a whole bottle, while injecting huge amounts, probably about an eighth of speed, if not more, in some nights, and just banging.
Are you still doing the dealing and all that still?
Yes, yeah.
What
The thing is, once I stopped doing heroin, I went against heroin again. So anyone that was selling heroin in my area, I used to get them beaten up. I didn't want heroin in my patch. I didn't want heroin at all. It was just dirty. You couldn't trust it. When you're doing heroin, you fight. It's really hard to trust anybody, because when someone's clucking, when they're going through cold turkey, they will rob their own parents. They will rob their own wives, brothers, husbands. They will rob anybody, even just for a necklace, for a chain, just to get that little hit to stop the pain, to make the pain go away. Heroin's a very physical drug. I mean, you've seen the film Trainspotting, where what's it, Rennet? I forgot the guy's name. Ewan McGregor, I forget his character, and he's climbing on the ceiling and the baby's upside down, he's going and the baby's on the dice twisting its head and he's freezing and he's sweating and all this stuff. It's kind of, it's in a sort of an observation on what it can be like. It's just disorientating, it's horrible, but it will end. It does end when you stick with it. It's like anything, it can't go on forever. Cocaine's the opposite. Cocaine gets into the brain and it starts tricking you, because you think it's you that's thinking those thoughts, but it's the cocaine receptors tricking you to get to do more cocaine, to make you have a drink, which lowers your willpower, and then you end up going getting some cocaine. So this time I'd gone off from speed and drink, and I bumped into an old friend, the old friend from the pub, the one that introduced us to cocaine, and found out that the suppliers were still there. So I started back up and started up a more professional business, changed the way I dress, changed the way I look. I was much bigger then. I was into going to the gym. I was a bit more healthier. I'd eat a large amount of food. I was always working as well. I always made sure, this is another thing I forgot to say, I always made sure that I was working at a 9-to-5 job, because that always kept the police off your back. If you had money and you had a car or you had nice clothes, then you could always say it was the job. If you weren't working, and obviously, where are you getting your money from? There's a question mark, which always starts.
What sort of work were you doing?
Anything from working in industrial factories, picking, packing, working on farms, labouring, doing bricklaying.
So it was a cover, really.
Yes, yeah. And I didn't give a flying monkey's nuts about what job I did, because I didn't care if I got paid 180 a week, £200 a week, £500 a week. It didn't matter, because I was earning more a day than I was earning a week. So the job was literally, it's like being a spy, really. But I didn't care still.
Okay, so you're still taking which drugs now?
Primarily just taking cocaine and just drinking whiskey, and that's it. And everything else is just literally just me. So now I'm still selling ecstasy, still selling speed.
Now age is what, roughly 22?
I'd have been 21, 22. So I was about 20, I think 21. And I'd sort of come into my own then, 21, 22. And that's when I really sort of established myself, and I had people working for me. I had runners. I had people that would go.
How many?
About 3 at the time. About 3, and I had other people doing sort of smaller jobs, or what you called contractors, that would contact me if there was something going on. And I'd say, right, you pay me. I pay them to go and do something for me, but they weren't on the books, if that makes sense. They weren't full-time, or they weren't close with me. They were just people that sort of filled the gap sometimes. So yeah, that's when I had connections with some properties and some pubs and garages where cars would be taken, things would be fixed into cars. We do deliveries, we were doing stashing, we were doing warehousemen, we were doing deliveries. I mean, it was all suddenly just taken off. It was very much like a gangster film, but it was kind of like nothing like, obviously, the craze or anything like that, nothing massive, but in comparison to where I was living and for where I come from, I was earning a nice amount of money. Most of it was being spent back on drugs and stuff and clothes and things like that. And then someone introduced me to washing up cocaine, which is turning it into crack. And they said to me, I'm not going to show you this. And I was like, come on, you just got to show me once. It's easy. And anyway, I bartered it. I convinced him to show me, and he showed me how to do it, and I smoked it. And I wasn't that impressed with it, really. Not because I was always doing heroin before when I did crack. Now this was just doing crack by itself. So it's different. You don't have like an underlining chemical imbalance. If you're doing heroin, you're already down, and coke just brings you up, and you go back down to the heroin line again. I was normal and then doing crack. So I didn't think much of it, but there must have been something there, like a little hook that must have got sort of winding up and started up. And then on the Friday nights, we go to the pub, sniffing coke, and then go out and do stuff, come back, and we'd have a couple of lines, and I start washing a bit up, and have a couple of crystals or rocks of crack. And then before you know it, once again, as I do everything. So like me and my friend Tony used to push each other, I'd push myself. And then it was just washing up 1 gram, 2 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams, 14 grams sometimes in one night, and just smoking it and smoking it and smoking it. I mean, say one night over one weekend, sorry. And then I got heavily into crack, and that went on for just over 2 years. And I suppose that in itself was an interesting journey, because I just used to smoke crack. It got to the point where I was managing to smoke it one day and taking the day off, smoking it one day, apart from weekends where I'd smoke it every day. I was dating a girl at the time, and she never used to do any with me, but I had a large group of family members, and also the people I used to hang around with was about 15, 16 of us, and they were all my customers. So I was around people that were constantly buying off me. I had runners within that group as well, people that used to work for me, people that used to work muscle for me and do things. So I had a nice big close family, in essence, almost found like my own family. But little did I know that the people were talking behind my back. There was information being leaked out, and lo and behold, I got busted. The night I got busted, there was actually three police raids designed to catch me. 2 of them failed because I had contacts in the police, which, as you said, you got an umbrella, you got a roof. I'd built a roof. Through contact, through knowledge. Also,
what was in it for the police, though, telling you?
Well, blackmail. I knew information about them. So I had information about them, and they were doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing as a police officer.
Was this mostly CID?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you scratch my back, I scratch your back. You just give me a word, you give me a text, you tell someone to tell me. There was always, rather than tell me directly, there was never any links directly between me and the police. I would never want to be seen talking to the police. The police were scum. They were doing what they were doing. Don't get me wrong, I think some of the police do an amazing job. They do a brilliant job, and they go out there because there are certain elements to them that are doing the job right. But they're human beings.
But the third time they got you, this was over the same day or same couple of days?
No.
Over a longer period?
Over a period of about 4 or 5 years. No, 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it was Operation Bumblebee that one they got me on. This was the guy that grasped me up. I even found out who grasped me up because I had his door marked. I had 3 guys going to go in and basically smash him, put him into a wheelchair, which I called it off. Something told me not to go through with it at the time. He would never. He was the one that handed me over to the police information-wise and got me to be at a certain place at a certain time, and he was there, and he was the last person I served. But it was, to be fair, it was a welcomed exit because at that time I had.
Just take us through that whole police raid and your arrest.
I was with my girlfriend at the time. She was driving around, and she would just drive around. I'd just say, "You go here, go there, drop me. Go drop me here." I'd walk off, come back to the car, drop me there. So she knew what I was doing, but she didn't know how much, what was being spent, what was being sold. And there's a part in Lambourn where there's a little triangle by the Catholic club. And there was about 13 police cars. Shit, there was senators, there was riot vans, and they just basically, as we drove around this corner, I could see the police cars behind. She was like, and she started panicking. I said, just go this way. And as we come to this triangle, there was police cars everywhere. They already knew where we were.
This is Wiltshire.
This is Berkshire. I think it was a mixture of both. Actually, to be fair, it may have been Oxfordshire. Oh yeah, I got taken to Oxfordshire actually. So there must have been Oxfordshire police too. I wasn't taken to West
Thames Valley.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. So the police. At the time, they'd already raided my dad's house, so I wasn't there. I didn't know this when I was being arrested at the time. They arrested my then girlfriend, and they'd made numerous arrests across the whole of Lambourn. My family members, some of my friends and stuff. People's houses have been kicked indoors. Been kicked about nine raids in one village. It's a little village called Lambourn, little sleepy village, which is not so sleepy. It's a very, very interesting place. Anyway, so I was taken up to, I believe it was Oxford. I say Oxford, but it was in the Oxfordshire border. I can't remember. Bearing in mind I was smoking crack that day as well, so I was a little bit off kilter anyway. So I remember having cocaine in my pouch in my trousers. I used to keep it in my with my waistband, and I kicked some stuff out the bottom of my shoes when I got out of the car to kick it under the car. I tried to remove as much as I could, thinking they haven't got nothing on me. They can't. If they arrest me, I've got nothing on me. They can't prove anything. Anyway, long story short, got to the police station, sat me in the cell. And about 2 hours later, they brought me into the interview room, and the police officer opposite, they do their usual thing, they read all the acts, they press the tape and all that stuff. And he pulls out Exhibition A, which is a plastic see-through bag. It's my crack pipe. And it was a little Jack Daniels, the little sort of the miniature Jack Daniels bottles. And I'd managed to tap through it and made a crack pipe out of it. And it was my special little crack pipe. If anyone does drugs or anything knows about drugs, you have kind of like pipes and things that you use, like maybe you use certain things for heroin, like tubes. And they're kind of personal to you. They're kind of like an extension of you. And the little Jack Daniels bottle was the Jack Daniels what I used to drink. So it was kind of like a representation of alcohol and crack. And it was kind of my little thing. Anyway, he picks his bag up. He says, "You recognise this?" I said, "Yeah, it's mine." And he said, "Anything to say?" I said, "Yeah, you can keep it." He said, "What?" I said, "Well, actually, no." I said, "Actually, can I have it?" I started laughing. He goes, "Well, you know I can't." I said, "No, you can keep it." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You just saved my life." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I was either going to die by doing crack," I said, "or get arrested." And I said, "And you guys have saved me now." I said, "Now you've given me a reason to stop." And he was obviously baffled by this. He was like, "Well, why don't you just stop?" I said, "Because I'm too deep." I said, "I'm far too gone." I said, "I need someone to help me." And I said, "Even though you think what you're doing is obviously the right thing, you're arresting me." I said, "You're actually helping me out." I said, "Because I'm too far. I'm too far gone and I really need help." So he was like, he's sort of puzzled. And I said to him, "Look," I said, "the best thing you've done today is actually saved my life." And I said, "But you guys don't even realise it." I said, I was just gone. I was completely gone. I didn't care about anything at all. I wanted to be dead. But then that would have been, I always put it onto the child abuse, sex abuse. That was the big thing that I was burying. I never wanted to face that. If I was ever sober, those were the things that would come round in my head. It was always that would bubble up. If I ever spent a couple of days sober without drinking or without doing something, those were the thoughts that would come back. So it was always something eating away at me, constantly eating away at me. So I pushed it away all those years. So that was my fuel to do all the drink and drugs, was to keep away from those memories, that trauma.
It's just an escape, really.
Yeah. Numbing the pain. I mean, I'm sure there's other cofactors in there as well, but that was the turning point.
Okay, so you went to court. I imagine. How long did you do time?
So I went to magistrates' court, and they bumped it up to Crown Court because they couldn't deal with me. They found 1,001 ecstasy tablets. At the time, I was buying and selling cars, so my business front, self-employed business front, was buying and selling second-hand cars, and I would stash drugs in these cars. So what they found was scales, they found bags, they found all the stuff preparing them. But to be fair, at the time, by this time I'd made two massive contacts, one up in Liverpool and one up in Leeds. So during the cocaine days, like the end of my thing, I'd made contacts in some large towns. Two main towns are close to where I was, and they had already working with some guys up north. So the entry or the sort of qualification to meet these people was you had to share knowledge about your family, about where you lived and stuff. It was kind of like you see in the films with Pablo Escobar. And you got to give me photographs of your daughters and your children and your wife and tell me your address. And you sort of like, to get qualified, they have to trust you because they don't know you from nothing. So you give information, they research that information, and they say, "Yeah, we can work with you now." And I was working with two very big suppliers. They weren't just drug dealers. These guys were quite easily. They were criminals. They were professional criminals. These were career criminals. I was what I thought a big fish in my little area. These guys were sharks. Okay, I was under no false impression.
What was their relationship with the police? They must have felt fairly untouchable.
I never spoke to them on more of a business basis. No. Met them once or twice. I mean, one of the things when I was over in a town in Wiltshire, three other guys, one girl and two other guys that I was really good friends with. The reason why we were good friends because we used to buy everything with cash. Most people would tick. They would borrow the drugs and then sell it for other people. We were different. There were four of us. We had independent businesses. We run different areas, but we were good friends. We go out drinking together on the weekends and stuff. And we made a contact from Liverpool area. and these guys had come down, and we were buying the first 9 bar of coke, and it was the only thing I can describe it. It shimmered blue. It was like a shiny blue, white block, and we were like, yeah, and it was £25,000 for this block. It was cheap at the time, and the guy was like, right, he said, you got to cut this 4 times. You have to stamp on this or cut it 4 times. And we were looking at each other thinking, we didn't even know how to cut coke. We haven't got the machine. We haven't got the factory, the devices for this. He explained how to do it. And he said, you need a press. You need to press this thing. So out the bag came a press. And we're like, fuck. And he goes, that's £5,000 for the press. And we're like, but we don't want the press. And he pulled out a gun, put it on the table. And we just looked at each other and went, oh, shit. And we realised that was one of the points. We realised that we were no longer our own businessmen. We were in a closed little environment now, and we were theirs. We weren't ours. So I knew at that point, many years before, that every decision I made had to be my own decision, and my family and anyone connected to me was nothing to do with that. So if I was to ever be caught or imprisoned or taken to court, if I ever spoke names of these sort of people or spoke sort of any intricate details, the stuff that I knew that it wasn't going to affect just me. It was going to affect immediate people and probably people closer to those people as well. So I went in fully aware of what I was doing, and I went in with the full knowledge that I was going to take the full hit. And if anything happened, I was the one going to prison. I was the one taking the punishment. No one else needed to be dealt with. No one else needed to be spoken about. It was as simple as that. And I knew that many years before. So when I got arrested going forward, it went to the magistrate's court and they said, have you got anything to say? I said, nothing. So they took me to Crown Court, got given my barrister and all that stuff. And they basically gave me the sort of the lowdown. I'm looking at 5 to 8 years with the amount of drugs that were found. And I said, that's fine. That's cool. I'm good. So I signed myself into a rehab program called Turning Point.
Just before we get onto that, can you just give us your idea of your perception of anything that was going on at the higher levels of drug dealing? Because I mean, for many people, they suggest. I mean, you've already suggested that some police are turning a blind eye to this deliberately for whatever reason, maybe even being paid off, etc. But I think at a national level, an international level. This seems to be the only way to stop supplies of these powerful drugs, and that seems to be something which is just simply not dealt with. I mean, we had here in Bristol, for example, a few years ago, an operation by Avon and Somerset Police to arrest a whole load of homeless drug dealers and send them to prison. And then you think to yourself, well, of course, this is an idiotic thing to do, because there'll just be a whole new tranche of homeless drug dealers will appear to take their place, and then they can sort of, the big guys can play one lot up against another lot. What I'm interested in is your perception of the international levels of this goes trade.
Up. Yeah, this for me, from what I know, from what I'm experienced, I know this goes right up through the police stations, up to what you call lieutenants, colonels, generals. There's knowledge of this. There's knowledge of these things going on. And there are probably no more than a handful of people that are privy to the information.
So this is the military also, military intelligence?
Well, no, I'm talking that police. The police stations have their kind of... I'm using words like lieutenant...
Well, there's things like the National Crime Agency, and they are supposedly dealing with organised crime, supposedly.
Well, from what I know about shipments coming in and how things get into the country, there would have to be a knowledge within large establishments, government-based establishments, or back then government-funded establishments, or government arm, or things that were connected to the government's funding, things that obviously the taxpayers pay for. So back then, there was definite knowledge, because all class levels, the talking politicians, corporate owners, corporation owners, they do drugs. Let's not pretend they don't. They're human beings. They like to party, like to have orgies and sex and all the things.
Apparently banksters do. The city was quite rife.
Oh, yeah, cocaine. These kind of things, they happen at all levels, because it's human beings. We're all human beings, and we all have likes and dislikes.
They're all buyable, I suppose.
Yeah, they're malleable. People like politicians, the conclusion I have of the majority of politicians that we sort of know of, they're malleable and they're just prostitutes.
And what about this whole thing of decriminalisation of drugs?
To be fair, I would probably lean more towards that in some way, primarily because it takes the criminality out of it. When you take the criminality out, it takes out the sort of the darker element of drugs, the secrecy. People being drug addicts, they're ill, and they're ill because probably they've got injuries, mental, psychological, physical injuries from the past, and they're probably trying to do what I was trying to do.
They're not just bored then? Or?
No, if you're bored and you do drugs, you get bored of doing drugs because you're bored, but there's usually an element, like I said, there's a hole in the soul, if I use that term.
That you're trying to escape from.
Yeah, you're trying to block it, you're trying to fill it, or you're trying to block yourself from some sort of memory. And I've never, like the thing with abuse, the way I see abuse is one of three things tend to happen to people. And this can be psychological-based, trauma-based, physical-based, sexual-based abuse. You either go on to abuse yourself, you either go on to abuse other people, or you abuse yourself and other people. These are usually the first three outcomes. There is a point where you can turn that around and you can start reflecting. So if you abuse yourself, you might be anorexic, bulimic, you might be a cutter, you might cut yourself, you might self-harm, you might overeat. It's the same as the opposite of undereating. You might put yourself in relationships or put yourself around situations and people that cause aggression and turmoil. You kind of magnate towards that. So there's this kind of, there's much more that I'm talking about. I'm trying to sort of dwindle things down here. But the self-abuse, that sort of thing, you can do that by self-abuse. Abusing others, you can become violent, you can become nasty, psychological, you can guilt trip people. There's other ways to torment people and bully people verbally, online, social media and stuff, obviously, which is a big thing now. Or you can do both. I actually become a bully myself. I self-harmed, I've cut myself. I've tried to kill myself twice, unsuccessfully, because I'm still talking right now. I'm a really person trying to commit suicide. Both tried to hang myself. So the first time the rope snapped, and the second time the rope was too thin, and it hurt so much that I actually had to take it off and cut the thing off. So this was when I was a teenager. I was probably 14, 15 then.
Okay, so let's get back to your sentence.
So it was moved to Crown Court. So what I'd done then, I'd used this sudden sort of intervention to break away from the people that I was surrounded by. Nobody, all the sort of, if you start from like the sort of main people that I was being supplied by, they didn't want to touch me. I was dog now. I was dirt. No one wanted to get close to me. No one wanted to get close to me. And then the sort of good friends that I had, because there's no friends in drugs when you're dealing that sort of. They're just associates, like Facebook friends. There's this sort of there, but those sort of people were very dubious of me, and people didn't have much time for me. Plus, I'd stopped doing drugs. I'd stopped drinking, and I stopped doing drugs.
How long did that take? Was that easy?
Oh, that was almost instantaneously. It was almost like someone had lifted a veil off me, and I felt kind of light. It was weird. I felt scared. I felt alone. I felt I suppose, what's the thing when you're not protected? Vulnerable. That was it. I felt vulnerable, and I was looking for people to talk to find out what I could do next.
But there weren't any really real physical or mental symptoms of coming on?
Crack, insomnia, couldn't sleep, the sort of psychological games.
How long did that go on for?
Oh, crikey, probably a good couple of weeks. And it still happens today, by the way. So I still get the. A
lot of smokers talk about having 20 years suddenly getting a bit of an urge for a cigarette, don't they?
I think if I watch TV programs or someone mentions something, I'd say one of the things when you use certain drugs, there's a ritual that goes with it. So for instance, if you're going to inject, say, speed, then there's a spoon, there's a needle, and there's usually a swab. So the smell of a swab. So if I go to a doctor's surgery or a hospital, I smell the smell of a swab, I think of the injections. If I see a needle, if I'm getting blood tests taken or something, I remember all the things I inject, all the drugs. If I see tinfoil, I think about the heroin. I also think about the bottle tops where I used to put crack and put the stuff in, pin holes in. Think about a pin. Think about a bottle. This is where you put the holes in. Think about a big pen. You start all these things that are connected to the ritualistic part of the drugs.
Sounds almost like a religion.
Yeah, it is, but it's a ritual as well, because when you cook up whatever it is, or you're making what it is, your supply, there's kind of a ritual to it, there's a process to it. It's kind of...
But anyway, look, I mean, once you've off the stuff, what filled that hole? Because you've still got the hole there, surely.
Yeah, so I went into Turning Point. I signed myself up to Turning Point for 5 days a week. So there was 8 weeks until my court case, my Crown Court case, which was the big one. So what I'd done... I need to be careful what I say here, because some of the things in court. So I'll try and remember. So I managed to get some good references written for me, some from workplaces, to sort of show that my character was still who I was supposed to show my true character when I wasn't taking huge amounts of drugs. So I had a lot of references done. I went to Turning Point. There was a guy called Bruce, a guy called Sheila, a lady called Sheila.
Where is this? What is this?
This is in Newbury. Turning Point is it's famous for the Hungerford Bridge in London. Under the Hungerford Bridge in London, there was a charity set up called Turning Point. I don't know if they still exist. Turning Point is mental health, drug addiction, and alcoholism. And you can sign yourself in, or you're sent there by the courts. So I signed myself in through meeting a guy at the police cells in Newbury. Police station in Newbury, called SMART, Substance Misuse Awareness Reckonance Team, or something, like an acronym. I don't think SMART exists anymore. But they put me onto Turning Point, and then from Turning Point, I went there. I went to the doctors every week, and I had a urine sample given and a blood test taken to prove that I had no drugs in my body and no alcohol in my blood. I mean, these were kind of like. So
it sounds to me, in that interview room, you absolutely decided, right, that's it. I'm going to be clean now, and if I'm not going to do it, nobody is.
Yeah, the will was always there. But the will was small.
But getting back to filling the gap, because the gap is there that the drugs were filling. What did you do? So in terms of a sentence, and then what did you do to sort of fill that gap?
So what happened was in the courtroom, the judge was given all the evidence against me. All the things that were found, and then they had all the police records, and they read out your big long list of criminality and violence and GBH and attacking police officers and drink drive, all the stuff that I'd done before, my previous prison sentence for drink driving and attacking police officers and crashing cars and have you. So all that's read out, and obviously you're hearing that and thinking, I'm going down. I'm easily doing 8 years here. There was a guy called Judge Spence was my judge. Judge Spence, he was famous in the Sun newspapers. If you do a little research on him, you'll probably find he's quite a fair judge. He listens and he assesses. So anyway, I'm sat.
Where was this?
This is in Reading Crown Court.
Reading,
yeah. I'm sat next to one of those. Who were the prison? The vehicles that is it something 4? They lost a lot of people. They used to
Group 4.
That's it, Group 4, maybe Group 4. I was sat next to a lady in the glass cage in my suit, sweating. And then the judge was given the information from my barrister about my references, my 8-week report from Turning Point, how I turned up. I was punctual. I took part in all the meditation. I took part in all the relaxation. I took part in all the acupuncture. I took part in all these different activities, the cooking activities. I was a great leader. I was helping people. I was a good mediator. I was very good at isolating myself when I got stressed and got tense. So all these reports were written. I had a probation officer that wrote a report for me saying he's a really intelligent person. He can actually make a really good change to society, or a good uplift to society. I had all these really brilliant reports written for me. And the judge was looking at this and looking at my past. So he asked me a couple of questions to sort of get a feel of where I was at. And he said, do you want to go to prison? I said, well, I've already contacted Bullingdon, a prison, because they had a thing called Carrots, which was like an education program in a prison. So when you go in, you can start getting diplomas and you can start getting degrees. So I'd already contacted them and said, as soon as I come in, I got a 3-week window, and then I can join the Carrots program and get an education. And he said, you've already done this? I said, well, yeah, I'm going to prison, aren't I? I said, so I might as well if I'm in there for 5 to 8 years, I might as well get educated. And he's like, so you want to get educated? He said, after all you've done? And I said, well... I said, Your Honour, I've done what I've done, and no one else is to blame here. I made these choices. I put myself through all these things. I said, but I was running away from something. And I said, and I've realised that I was running away from me. And I said, I can't hide from me. I'm me, so I can't run away from me. So now it's time to face me, and it's time to start doing stuff for me rather than against me. And I said, and the police officers and all the people that have been involved in the investigation and the operation have helped me. Even though they don't know it, they've actually helped me, and they've actually given me a chance. I said, I was actually having seismic, a thing called heart attacks, smoking crack, on the sofa with my friend. My arm was all clenching up, so I was that far gone, health-wise. So I was already had all the signals of going into the grave. I already knew that. And I was leaving. I was going to leave family members behind, which I didn't want to leave behind, but I was too deep. Anyway, so the judge had a chat, and there's a thing called a DITO, DTTO, a drug testing treatment order. I mean, this was back in the sort of, where was it, 2000 or something. So the longest DITO you can have is a year. So you get swab tested 3 times a week, and they put it, saliva tested, in your mouth. And you get a year-long probation, and you go to rehab 5 days a week. And so you get the weekends off to sort of see if you can live without doing any drugs or anything. So anyway, he wasn't happy with the year, so he gave me a 2-year ditto, which was the first ever, I believe, in Berkshire or West Berkshire or the Royal County of Berkshire. So he gave me a 2-year ditto. I had to restart the programme at Turning Point. And it's 12-week cycle, 12 weeks. So you do 12
So
weeks.
this is not a custodial sentence?
No, so I didn't.
After all what you'd done?
After all I had done, or they basically put me down to, the judge saw me as a victim. He didn't see me as, I know. I suppose what had transpired is I was very usable because I was an addict, and I was always in requirement of drugs. So people could, if you need me to do certain things, you just lessen my supply for a while, and then you point me in the right direction and give me more supply. So I was very malleable. I was usable. And looking back now, yes, I was. You could tell me to do something, I'll say I ain't doing that, and they go, right, we can't get any gear for you, and I'm like, oh crap, man, within 2 days I'll do anything you want. You get what I mean? So I was easily puppeteered.
Okay, so let's talk about you now. I mean,
Yes.
what do you obviously have done come through some sort of catharsis with all of this.
Oh yeah, I've reborn.
What does Earl, who is who he wants to be, what has he become? What have you become?
I'd say far more grounded, more aware of myself, and learn to love myself. I've actually learned to love my experiences that I've been through. Realised that the things that happened to me, they weren't my fault, and I wasn't to blame. These kind of things like, oh yeah, you say that, but to say it is one thing. Even to understand it's one thing, but to actually feel it and realise that you weren't to blame. You weren't to blame for what happened with your parents. You weren't to blame for being raped and abused. You weren't, to blame for being bullied. These kind of things, going back and revisiting that and reminding yourself, taking out the old records, throwing them away, putting in new records, playing the new records, the ones that make you realise it's an experience, and I can either let it shape me or I can shape myself. And what I've decided to do is start shaping myself. And the last sort of 5, probably 6, 7 years, I've really, really designed things. I mean, I went to 28 years old. Well, when I left all the rehab program after 2 years, I got a job into business. I'd always worked on the roads and in building sites, always worked manual labour jobs. I always wanted to wear a suit. So I decided I'm going to get a suit and I'm going to get an office job. I'm going to get a job and wear a tie. I want to wear a shirt. And I did. And for 2 years, I worked into sales and advertising stuff, probably sold my soul again. But I was good at the sales stuff. I was good with people. I was good with selling stuff. So I used my stuff that I already had, my skills. And I made quite a lot of money doing it. And I really enjoyed it. And I got into IT, into sales, and worked my way up. I went from 25k a year to 42k a year. Had OTEs up to 50 grand. I was a dumb at school. I mean, in the sense of going through the grades and things, but I knew how to do stuff. I was a quick learner. So I went all through the business. Got really good at sales. I became a senior accounts manager for a company called Danwood, which has now been taken to court by the government because they were corrupt as anything. They did anyway. So
what sort of company was that?
It was an IT company.
Okay.
They had a thing called a green. What was it called? It was in Satsu's Shoza, but they had a thing called the Green Program or something, where you basically you sign a contract for all your printers and all your telephone systems. And to try and cut the contract, you have to cut the contract of all of them, not one big contract. And they did it to a government company, and they got taken to the cleaners, the company. Anyway, but I worked for them before that all happened. And then I came out the other side of there, realised that I didn't want to be a salesperson because I was losing my soul again. My body had started increasing in size. I was eating a really bad diet. And I was doing a counselling course at the time, a night school. So I was always interested in education. So I did a night school counselling course in psychotherapy and stuff. So I was doing that to suss managing directors out and CEOs out to try and sell them products. I wanted to see body language. I wanted to get a better opinion of the person without them telling me a thing. But what it actually did, it gave me that too, but it actually psychologically and counselled me. And I counselled myself out of my job. So I went to university at 28 and did an art degree, interdisciplinary fine art. So I went and did the thing that I was meant to do when I was at 15, 16 years old at Newbury College, which I actually quit. When I quit college and worked on an egg farm packing eggs, So I literally 12 years later, I went back to my old life when I was sort of younger and did my university degree.
And where are you at now then? What sort of? Are you up
so
to?
now I work as a martial arts instructor. So I've got a second degree in Taekwondo, black belt. I've got a second degree in kickboxing, black belt. I've got an orange belt in a street martial art or a street self-defense thing called Defense Lab. I train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I train in Muay Thai. I've also do things like Iyengar yoga. I do Qigong pretty much every morning. My diet now is completely opposite to what it used to be. I have a plant-based diet. I haven't eaten animal flesh for 18 years. I haven't eaten animal byproducts for 15 years. I'm 43 years old as of last week. My life is changed. I've gone from hating myself and not wanting to be here to literally wanting to be dead every day, waking up thinking, why have I woken up for? What's the point? What's the point in this life? To now, can't wait to wake up. Sometimes I don't want to go to sleep because I'm so happy about being alive. So
what about spiritually?
Spiritually,
This is one of those questions I don't think gets asked enough.
Yeah.
Where are you at spiritually?
Spiritually, I'm very, very happy, and I'm ascending in myself. So I don't believe about being higher level than anyone else. I believe we're all on completely different journeys and we're all on our own sort of...
Well, that's a basic starting point, I think, for spirituality is realising that we're actually all
one.
equal.
Yeah, we are.
Really.
Yeah, definitely. But within myself, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, and I feel that I'm ascending in my journey and there's no rush. I don't feel like I have to push myself like before. I was always pushing with my friend, and now I'm much nicer to myself. And some things don't work out, that's fine, that's cool. It wasn't meant to work out right then. Maybe it'll work out next time. Just let it go, get on with it. There's a saying goes, you can't push a river. If you're in a river and you turn around and push upwards, you can, where your hands are, you can stop the water a little bit, but it goes around your hands. You turn around, you push down, the water with your hands goes a little bit faster, but pick your feet up, pick your hands up, and just go with the flow. Just chill.
So for anyone that knows anybody or is involved, particularly with organised crime, drugs, that sort of thing, have you got any advice for them?
Well, it depends where you're at within the system, really, and where your mind's at. Like I said, I didn't care about myself for most of it. Towards the end, I think I was rotting. That's what it was. I was rotting from the inside physically, and I was degrading and decomposing. And I think the mind,
mentally,
mentally, I was completely gone. I mean, my intelligence, all the stuff had dumbed down. My vocabulary was minimal compared to what it is now. But I mean, I'm sure there was some things that happened. But if you're looking to get out, then there's always a way out. But you've got to look for the opportunities. You've got to listen for the alarm bells. You've got to see the exit. And sometimes, like I had, the police operation that busted me was probably the last thing that most people would want. But for me, it was the thing that I welcomed the most.
But not everybody has that opportunity that happened to you. So for anyone, who doesn't have that opportunity, is there a way out? Or do you think it's almost... Because once you get these criminal relationships, it's very difficult to break away.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I suppose the fortunateness of, or the fortuitous situation for me, because I didn't go to prison from my Crown Court investigation, a lot of people said I was a grass. And I know I'm not. I never said any names. I never gave anything away, because if I had, some of my family members wouldn't be here today. That would be the evidence of me grassing up people. One of my friends did go to prison because she got busted later on because she didn't listen to me. And she carried on doing what she was doing, but she got lazy. And I explained to her, you can't do what you're doing. You have to be sharper. And I wasn't doing drugs, but I appreciated that she was still in the cycle. And I tried to help her, but unfortunately she got busted and she did go to prison. She had a really bad judge as well, which actually was the main reason. But apart from that, nobody went to prison. Nobody else. People got arrested, but no one went to prison. No one served any time apart from my best friend at that time, who was a very very good friend of mine until she moved away. But we stayed good friends for a good 3 or 4 years after that. So the person that you would have thought would have been hated me the most was the person that actually got on best with me, and we stayed really good friends. No one else got arrested.
But so how to get out of that sort of criminal relationship if you haven't got the police to help you, as you had?
No, I didn't have the police to help. Well, no, you mean the busting, yeah. It's a difficult one.
It's not an easy thing to walk away from, is it?
It's not, because the thing is, the elements of why you're in there. I know now why I was in there. I was self-abusing. And blocking things out, and I know why I was doing it, and that had come to the realization of that had come to me many times, but I was too scared, for one, because when you leave it all behind, what's next? When I left that world, or I say that I was evicted from that world, when I tried knocking on the door, no one answered. No one wanted to talk to me. I was like a leper. People didn't want.
It takes courage to walk away. How do you find that courage? Is it possible? Could you have done it without the police's help?
Well, I don't know if it was just courage for me. I think the alienation would help, because they thought it was a grass. And if people think you're a grass in the criminal world, nobody wants to talk to you. You go in a pub, say hi, people just turn away from you. You ask to buy people a drink, people just look at you. Some people spit. Some people have a go. You get into fights. So this is one of the main reasons why I started training myself in martial arts, because I realised that I was now on the outside looking in to a group of people that have no rules, no morals, because I used to be like them. I still had the headspace for it, but my morals were still growing. So I learnt to go to martial art classes. I started building positive foundations. So things like martial arts classes that I found, the people around there talk about positive things. And that was refreshing to me. I'd stand at the side, listen to people's conversations, thinking, they're talking about like good things. I mean, all the conversations I had was all about misery and stabbing people, and how much money you're going to rip off someone.
Anyway, Earl, yeah. I mean, you were from around the Hungerford area.
Yes.
This is something that happened in 1987. Was the shooting of Michael Ryan?
Ah, yes. 6 days before my
if
birthday.
you could just maybe round off by giving us your sort of Hungerford's eye view of what happened there.
Okay, so the Michael Ryan incident, I mean, that's a very heavy subject for someone. It happened 6 days before my birthday, so I'm born on the 25th of August. So on the 19th of August is when it happened. I mean, I remember the day, because it came on the television, and it was the afternoon news, the sort of 5 o'clock news, and it was the local news, and it was a massacre in Hungerford, and a lone shooter or something. And I must have been 11 or 12 at the time. And I remember it, and I remember looking and being mesmerised, that someone was shooting people in Hungerford and a police officer being shot. And then fast forward a couple of weeks later, and then we were going back to school after the summer holidays. So the John o' Gaunt school is still built the same way as it built before. There's most of it's a single block, like single level. Then you have the maths and science block, which is a 2-story block, which is the far end of the school. It's kind of like an S-shaped school if you look from bird's eye view. And then the far end, which is the closest part to the road, is a 3-story block, and that's the area where he had holed himself up and supposedly shot himself or killed himself. So there's a lot of information, disinformation out there. So it's very murky territory. Bearing in mind, there's a lot of people saying there's one end of the spectrum saying it's a false flag. I can assure you now, what happened there it happened. It was real. People were killed. That's simple fact. It's not like some of the stuff that happens in America or happens in Europe and things where there's so-called shooters and no bodies are found, or there's fake funerals and stuff that you can find online, and there's fake websites set up and things. This was a real event. And literally one in 3 people were affected in Hungerford. This was a school I went to. So when we went back to school, certain things didn't make sense, because we were all told he killed himself. There was a couple of questions. I even remember as a teenager, he was supposedly left-handed, but he'd used the right hand to kill himself because the bullet was found on the right side of his head. That was a question that the older kids talked about. I didn't really understand what that meant, and I was a kid. But one thing that there was a couple of things that shocked me. The carpet on the floor in that room hadn't been changed, so there was a dark patch on the floor where his body had bled out, and they hadn't bothered to rip the carpet up and put a new. They bleached it because you could smell the stench of bleach in the room. It was Mrs. Taylor's, an English tailor's room. And the theory that there was a thing saying the police weren't shooting at him, he was the one shooting out. Now, the angles, when you look at the wall, you can see angles of bullets, you can see angles of indentation, which way the angle, the trajectory of the bullet. Now, you could see a couple of bullets that were aiming diagonally upwards. That was definite. You could see that. And you could see them because the people hadn't even plastered over the holes properly. They just put a bit of plaster, rubbed it, and they haven't even properly sanded it. So you could see certain angles, you could see things, the trajectory. And the thing that struck me the most was there were angles going downwards. And there's no buildings close by that are over 3 stories high. It's the highest part of the building in that area. So there has to have been a helicopter with a shooter. And I remember that as a child. And many years later, it sort of came onto my scope. Someone mentioned it in a talk, talking about MK Ultra, mind control, talking about, doing patsies. You go to JFK, you got RFK, you got, what's his name? Sirhan, who's the guy that's had 14 appeals and he doesn't remember anything about it. And you can even watch the sort of Darren Brown show where he convinces someone to shoot Fry lorries and Stephen Fry on stage. I don't know if you've seen that one. He basically takes a whole studio audience. I mean, it's Darren Brown, so it's television. So hey, you got to take it a bit, pinch of salt. But he takes probably 200 people in a studio audience and dwindles it down to 4 people, 4 men, and he dwindles the men down to 2, and he dwindles it down to 1. And he gets this guy to, through hypnosis, through suggestion, to pick up a gun and a gun range and shoot these targets, hypnotised. And then he gets Stephen Fry to go on stage, and he gets him in this room, up in the what do you call it, in like one of the viewing boxes, and he does the suggestive behaviour and he shoots Stephen Fry on the stage, and he doesn't remember any of it. So what the programme was sort of related to Sirhan, where he killed RFK. Yeah,
it's pretty simple stuff, actually, to hypnotise somebody to be a kind of Manchurian candidate style.
Yeah. And that sort of stuff sparks up memories of the past about massacres and stuff. And you've got the things going on in America and people trying to remove guns from people, the citizens and stuff. And then I was reading a report about the Boer Wars, which it sounds completely unrelated, but people came back from the Boer Wars and the gun licensing and stuff was relaxed in England. It was more encouraged to have guns. They had more rifle ranges, more pistols, more assault rifles. Cost of things came down. And the First World War came, Second World War came, and by that time people were used to having guns in the countryside, in town, so people were used to having weapons. And there's the things that I'm reading are about sort of the change of war tactics. So rather than having a physical war, which you can now have with drones and from distances, you have an economic war in different countries. So then what you don't want is citizens with guns. You don't want them practicing in rifle ranges. So you need to remove the guns. You need to change the laws. But once you've expanded something, it's very hard to close it back in. So you need events. And people call them false flag events and stuff. It depends how you perceive a false flag, because in some false flag events, people do die, people get killed, and that's a reality of the situation. But in the more modern ones, false flag events tend to be faked by media and stuff and acted, and from what I understand anyway. So there was a massive change after the Michael Ryan shootings.
So who was Michael Ryan? What was behind it? Why did he shoot people?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea about it. I never met the guy. I don't know anything about him. There's lots of controversy about he was a quiet loner, such. People say that he was just quiet. Some people say he had psychological issues. He was talking to a lieutenant on the phone who believed he was going to buy him a Ferrari and stuff, and he would tell his mum about it. His mum sort of welcomed this kind of mind relationship because she felt that apparently it was just in his head. But other people said he was actually talking to people. And then these other people. But who are these other people? Where are the witnesses? Where are the conversations? Where's the evidence? So you're always scratching in the dark for evidence for these sort of things, and sometimes the supporting evidence of some conversation or evidence is not there, so it leaks. But I mean, one of the elements of the Michael Ryan thing is what I find in most of these modern day sort of shootings or terrorism acts, they're always shot in the head. So so the perpetrator is never able to then give evidence against what it is. There's never any.
It never comes to court, does it?
Yes, that's it. I mean, the guy that's 7-7, the guy that was running for the train and stuff, shot in the head. And then you speak to people, and I know people that are actually armed police officers. I know one guy that works for the armed police force. I know guys that work as police officers too. And their argument would be, well, if they're dangerous, then we get orders to shoot them in the head anyway, to take them out. So we have to take them out. So there's always that sort of catch. It's like, well, that makes kind of sense. But there's also the part, well, you don't always have to kill the person. You can maim them, you can shoot them in the arms and legs. You know, you can do, if you're that good a shot, if you can shoot someone in the head, you can definitely shoot them in the shoulder or the...
Well, it's actually the shoot-to-kill policy, which was used by the Special Forces, the SAS, and people like that in Northern Ireland, which was controversial at the time. Yeah. But now that's being normalised. The idea that we don't want you to give evidence, we don't want you to be just disarmed. I mean, for example, if someone is holding a handgun, shooting them in the arm, they're not going to be able to use that handgun.
No, exactly. So you've got even if you've got a rifle... If you take out if someone's using their right hand,
these are quite important ethical issues, really, aren't they? About whether the armed forces or the police are trying to facilitate the course of justice or trying to end it and stop it.
Well, I suppose the element with Michael Ryan, he was supposedly shot himself. From the evidence that I saw with my own eyes in the building, in the 3-story block, he was being shot at as well, and he was definitely being shot at. Whether he killed himself with his left hand or right hand, I never saw the body, never saw the autopsy, so I can't prove on that. However, there was, like I said, something from the Boer Wars that was going all the way into an expansion of arms, then to the criminalisation or the reduction of arms, and they needed a big event. I say they. The elements of corporation and government need to remove arms from people. They need to minimalise it. And the toughest gun laws in the whole of the EU are in the UK. And the first turning point for that was the Michael Ryan incident. Police suddenly started getting bulletproof vests. And then 9 years later, you had the Dunblane incident, the one with the primary school children. There's always these elements of there's parliamentary officials or army officials or people that are interacting with these people at some point, and also the psychological aspects that these people could be patsies or could be, I say patsies, but they could be mind controlled. They were susceptible to certain elements of being...
Well, one thing's for certain, quite a lot of these people end up being mental cases of one sort or another, having some sort of psychological difficulty. Anyway, fascinating discussion from the villages of Lambourn in East Garston to Hungerford and now into Bristol too. Earl Jesse, thanks very much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Well, that's all for this week. Dialects Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast. You can download it to listen on your phone or in the car. Suggest interviewees, subscribe to our email list, and listen the week before broadcast if you like at our website dialectradio.co.uk. Thanks to our guests, that is Earl Jesse, and also to studio engineer Dave Bazanko. Dialects a Bristol Broadband Co-op production. Catch us on Bristol Community FM 93.2 every Tuesday at noon, and anyone can contribute. Contact us through the People's Republic of Stokescroft, just off Jamaica Street. They're online at prsc.org.uk. If you have some of your precious time to spare, you can volunteer with us or for hundreds of opportunities elsewhere in Britain via the National Volunteering website, do-it.org. Thanks for listening to Dialect, and I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a very good week. I'll be back on Friday with my 2-hour BCFM politics show, live from 6 till 8 p.m. Meanwhile, till next Tuesday midday from the Dialect crew, goodbye for now.